Hello, children, and welcome back to Bible study. And we're going to be here in part 2 of Gideon. Now, this is the part that our founding father, Thomas Paine, points out in Common Sense. And it is just brilliant, and it's amazing, and it was really important for that time. But he uses Gideon in the pamphlet Common Sense that was really instrumental to bring the independence of the United States from the Brits. And so here we are at the end of the story yesterday. They're all celebrating because they just beat the Midianites. And I did some reading, and those of tens on tens on tens of thousands in that army. And you have Gideon here, and his men are surrounding him, and they're celebrating. Hooray, we won! Hooray, we won! And they say, you know what, Gideon? You saved us. Gideon, you're the man. Gideon, we want to make you king over us. Now, if this was me, I'm going to show you what I would do if somebody said, hey, Matt, you go be king. King Matt, everybody. And King Matt would be like, I'm your king. Serve me food. I like donuts. I like steak. I like milk straight from the cow. And that's what I would do. All right? But Gideon knows his scriptures, which is remarkable. I don't know how Gideon does this because of all the exile, or not the exile, but because of all the struggles and idol worship. He tore down idols. So I don't know if he really grew up in the faith or not. But he knows, and this is something straight from the old law, there should not be a king. Only God should rule over you. Only God should rule over Israel. So he says, you know what? I think I will not be your king. Well, soldiers at this time aren't paid. They don't have there is no salary for a soldier. They are paid by the plunder or the spoils of war. So if they go kill someone or beat someone up, they can get their gold. And so he says, I want an earring from everybody. And I want a little bit of a tribute, which is perfectly fine, and that's perfectly par for the course. There's nothing wrong with this. And Mr. Gideon decides, I'm going to make an ephod out of this. And so an ephod would be something along the lines of a priestly garment. So we have a priest up here, but it's the garment from here to here. So just the really fancy part. And these ephods, the fancier they were, only the higher up priests wore them, right? And pagan culture in the Baals or in Egypt, these ephods would be specially made for their idols. And so you would have these big idols, and you would throw the ephod on there, and that would show you how important it was. Now, enough gold was collected, depending on which measurements you use, is 40 to 70 pounds. If it's 40 pounds, that's bigger than Augustine. If it's 70 pounds, that's bigger than Augie and Oli. I mean, this thing's huge, and it's heavy. And this thing is just a big slug of gold. Well, what happens is just like before Gideon, Israel starts worshiping the idol. And I don't know if there's an idol under this ephod or not. I don't know if it matters. The commentaries and the stuff that I was reading says it is big enough, and the practice at the time, that the ephod was probably covering an idol. I don't know. It's not very clear, but the culture of the time says there might have been. And so what Gideon did was he set this up in his hometown, Ophrah. Not Oprah, Ophrah. And people started coming there to worship. And they started leaving God. And that's a problem. That's a huge problem. When anybody starts to worship something other than God, they have stopped obeying. See, Gideon was a man that obeyed God very, very, very well until after the victory. And here in this last part, he takes credit for the victory and doesn't give it to God like he has in the rest of the story. He takes the spoils of war and he makes something the people worship. And you see what's crazy is you look at the old law, the books that were given to Moses on how the Israelites were supposed to live, and that looks really similar to a marriage covenant in the Judeo culture, what the Hebrews would do for marriage. And so literally what people think that are way smarter than me, the whole law is a marriage covenant between God and his people, and God marries the Hebrews. And so when Gideon creates this idol, and whether or not he wanted to or not, he let the Israelites cheat on God. And they stopped worshiping him, and they stopped obeying him. And then that whole crazy cycle we talked about yesterday starts all over again. So Gideon started out as a great leader. But Gideon didn't follow through all the way. Gideon has 70 sons. Gideon has a lot of wives. You're not supposed to have a lot of wives. Gideon has a concubine, which means it's like marriage, but we're not actually going to be married. And so Gideon doesn't follow through with his obedience all the way. You see, that's why I say, obey your parents. It's the first commandment with a promise that you'll have long life. Obedience is so amazing. It's so beautiful. I read another quote the other day. Obedience, if someone can't obey, they're not fit to lead. And it's the first step to being a great leader is to be able to obey and follow. Gideon does that in the beginning, and then he falls away. So be very, very careful, because I'm no king. You're not a king or a queen. God is the king. Now, you are his son or you're his daughter. And so that makes you his prince or his princess, which is beautiful and just amazing. But that doesn't mean you can't obey him. So always obey the Father. And through obeying your parents, you obey God, your king. Because no man is king but God. Obey your mama, little fish. That's our story for the day. That's why we're under the sea. And it's going to be another fantastic one, because obedience is important. No matter if everybody wants to make you king or queen, it doesn't matter. You still need to obey. You need to obey your parents. You need to obey God. You need to obey what God has told you in the Bible. Obedience is the first step to leadership. Once there was a family of fish that lived in dirty, muddy water. One day, Mama said, "If you will follow me and be close behind, I will lead you to beautiful water." The fish started out all in a row, but one little fish saw a fat, juicy worm. The little fish said to himself, I'll just start out a line and catch that worm. No one will ever miss me. So the little fish left his mama and the other fish, and he caught that worm. the little fish didn't see the worm had a hook. He didn't even know that there was a fish hook until it was caught in his mouth. The little fish cried, "Mama, Mama! Help! Help! Save me!" Mama heard her little fish. Quickly, Mama Fish swam back. She bit the line in two, and the little fish was free. But the poor little fish's mouth hurt because the fish hook was still there. You know, we're all kind of like that little fish. When we disobey and don't know what we should do, we can be forgiven if we ask, but we still feel the pain of not obeying God's commands. So, when we disobey what God tells us, it's a lot like getting hooked. And I love the way one of my preachers talked about this. You see, I call him Restored Thumb Doug because he had his thumb and he was woodworking and he cut his thumb off. And then he went back to the hospital and they restored his thumb and sewed it back on. So I always called him Restored Thumb Doug. And Restored Thumb Doug called it the hook, the look, and the took. So, or maybe it was a look, hook, and took. I'm not sure. But sin is sometimes something that looks really good. And so we look at it and we think, it won't hurt. And then we go get hooked. And then Satan will took us or take us. For grammatically correct. It just doesn't rhyme that way. So you have to be very careful. And following Jesus and being his disciple and being a Christian isn't about what I can do and what I can't do, but it is about coming to Jesus and being changed. You see, Jesus didn't say, "You tax collectors and sinners, you need to change and then I'll spend time with you." No, those tax collectors and sinners were important to Jesus, so he spent time with them. And as he spent time with them, then they changed. And they still looked, but they didn't get took. And so that's the difference. When you come to Jesus and you start obeying, you will still look. I'm not saying look, because that's not okay. But you will, but it won't be as tempting because Jesus has changed you and you have been transformed from the inside out. You guys are absolutely amazing. Thanks so much for spending time today in Bible study and learning something new and not watching crazy YouTube cat videos, at least for 10 minutes or so. Hey, you guys be great. Remember, obey your parents and the Lord, for this is right. Be kind to one another, and just have a great day. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.